Hello, everyone. See the number of attendees just creeping up there. So obviously we're going to give it a moment for everyone to be able to log in successfully. We had quite the number of registrations, so it's certainly a topic of interest tonight. And just right off, we'll let you know if you do need to leave early for any reason. You will get the recording by email as well as the Growing Garlic 4-page guide. And just as we're waiting for the registration numbers to creep up there, I'll do some housekeeping. A lot of people are probably familiar with Zoom these days, but in case you are not, there is a chat option, but more so a Q&A option is what I'm asking people to use tonight. If you have questions for me about garlic throughout, you can pop your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll touch on that at the very end to go through any questions that pop up. The chat is there if you do want to use it besides, but otherwise, if you have questions for me, it's just easier on my end so that I don't lose any questions if you put them into the Q&A rather than the chat. Right, I think we shall get going anyway, giving it a couple minutes. And like I said, if you do need to leave early, or if anyone you know is going to be jumping on late, we will be sending out the recording for you. In addition to the Growing Garlic 4-page guide. So you will have all these notes and more. But if you do have any questions, like I said, we're using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask me questions. You can use the chat amongst yourselves besides, though. So welcome to the Growing Garlic webinar, and this is presented by the CBS Community Garden with myself, Trina Porter of the farm, which is an acronym for the Foxtrap Access Road Market. And we're going to be covering some best basic practices for growing garlic throughout the webinar. And you see the agenda more or less there on the left-hand side as we go. And with that, introduce you to, there we go, the CBS Community Garden. So they started in 2019 at the Gateway Garden location and have now expanded to 3 locations, their second one being Manuel's River, and the third coming in autumn 2021 is in the Ocean Glen area of Chamberlains. This is a small neighborhood garden pilot project, and they couldn't be more thrilled about that. If you want a small community garden in your neighborhood, just like 2 or 3 beds type thing, you can certainly reach out to them, and their contact information is there on the side. And then their Gateway and Manuel's is more so their public big locations. They do garden tours, which are completely free for CBS youth groups and community-based programs. You can, again, reach out to them either by email or through their Facebook group. Some events coming up with the CBS Community Garden that you might be interested in. There's a final harvest at the Manuel's location this coming Sunday, and that's an event for all present, but also all potential volunteers. So if you think you might want to get involved, head out there on Sunday and check it out 10 a.m. till noon. The following weekend, there is both tree planting events at the Ledrews location, and you can reserve a 2-hour booking time for a group, for an organization, for your book club, just to mix it up for next weekend. Or you can head out on the Sunday just for the fall appreciation event, and I believe that involves a barbecue. Next, well, in November actually, is the 3rd annual pumpkin stroll, and if you haven't been, definitely mark that in your calendar right now. It's a free event for all. If you or your family carves pumpkins, then you'll see their posts on Facebook collecting pumpkins after Halloween. And then on November 1st, there'll be a pumpkin stroll, and you'll get to experience everyone's creation. So that's a really cool event. Mark it in your calendars right now. So these are the webinars that the CBS Community Garden has done to date. You can check these out on their YouTube. And this is actually my second one with them. So in May of 2020, I did Planning Your Garden. So that was more of a general planning and spacing your garden, such as for square foot gardens, succession planting, and getting the most out of that space. And I touch on companion planting as well. So you can go back and check that out if you're already looking ahead to planning your 2022 garden. But since we're here to talk about garlic this evening, your first hot tip is that garlic is a natural pest deterrent and fungicide. So while I plant full beds of garlic, there is definitely an argument to be made for doing garlic one here, one there, all around the garden. And that's actually a quote from the Outlander series. Misfits tells the main character to do that with her garlic. It deters slugs, cabbage loopers, rust flies, even rabbits. So by putting it around your garden a little more so, you're deterring those pests. So first hot tip. And then there is the Foxtrap Access Road Market, which is my family's business. So we're actually roadside near 765 Conception Bay Highway, which is between Ledrews and Tiny's on the same side of the road. We're there Wednesday through Sunday weekly, and coming up on Thanksgiving, we very likely will be open every day, as well as doing the St. John's Farmers Markets on most Saturdays. You can follow us on Facebook or send us an email at any time if you need a bulk order in particular. And just a little shout out as well to Wolf and Wren Handmaids. You can find a selection of their children's clothes at our Ledrews location, as well as from my mom. She makes magnetic doll sets and reusable coloring books. And of course, you can also get garlic there. So check us out there, check us out at the farmers market. And if there's any interest in hampers, a pretty frequent fundraiser, and also for corporate gifts, if you're looking for some gifts for clients that will actually be put to use, you can reach out to us about bulk hampers as well. Okay, that's all my plugs for this evening. So we're going to get into growing garlic now. Make sure that there's everyone. Okay, so first step, well, I guess second, is plant large to grow large. So you want to actually select large bulbs in order to grow large bulbs. So the size of the clove doesn't necessarily matter. Now, if you want large cloves, select a bulb that has large cloves. But otherwise, you need to look. Sorry, my dog just came into the room where he's not supposed to be, and this is the time of working from home and all that. So one sec, I need to let him out. Okay, sorry about that. So I was saying, select a bulb that you would like to grow yourself. If you select a small bulb, you're not going to grow large ones, that it is your potential size that you're looking for, as well as the size of the cloves itself. So some people actually do like to have more small cloves in their bulbs rather than more large ones. Now I like large ones, but that's me. And this is because it actually clones itself. So there are different ways to plant garlic. We're covering tonight just planting by the clove, but you can actually plant by bulbils. And I'll show you a picture of that in a moment, as well as seed. But both of those methods mean that you take much longer to grow garlic than simply planting by the clove. So planting by the clove is the easiest way to do it, perhaps not the most cost efficient, but by bulbal it takes more like 5 years to get to your maximum size of garlic. So you can look that up as well, but just to say that it is possible. The next tip is buying local. So buying local ensures the garlic has been acclimatized to Newfoundland or wherever you may be. I'm in CBS, Newfoundland. So when you're buying garlic local to your location, that just makes sure that that garlic will in fact grow there to start with. So we grow in Newfoundland hardneck garlic, and there is such a thing as softneck. Those are the two major umbrella types, and then there's varieties rather, of both of those types, of course. But right off the bat, a lot of people say, can I just like go get the garlic at the grocery store? No. And now, by all means, experiment. That's okay. It's all a learning process, but that garlic was likely grown half a world away in very different conditions, and it will not necessarily grow well for you year after year. So while you may even have success one year, it very likely won't. It'll be like a one-off success, if at all. Next up is you're looking for, when you're selecting seed, I should have mentioned, again, your agenda is there on the left-hand side, so that we'll be moving through that list around selecting seed. Do you want to eat it? Does it look like delicious to you? Because if it doesn't, that's not your garlic seed. So I get the question all the time, oh, is this seed garlic? Well, I mean, yes and no. It's edible garlic and it's seed garlic, because if you don't want to eat it, if it doesn't look whole, if it isn't firm to the touch, and you don't want to eat it, then you don't want to plant it either. So keep those things in mind. The only caveat on that is that you need your garlic dried. Of course, you can eat dried garlic. That's what you're used to buying. But if you buy green garlic, then you need to cure it before you actually plant it. And we will be covering curing or drying garlic. But to show you there now, this is actually what a green garlic looks like. So it just means that it hasn't been hung to dry yet. So it still has the stalk on it. So if you bought green garlic, you would not be planting that directly. You would be drying it first and then planting. But is edible at this point and is considered a more of a delicacy, in fact. And then this would be more so what you're used to seeing. Once we dry it, we cut off the stalks, and it looks like this. The variety that You see here, and the variety that I've grown and am selling is the purple Russian garlic. So this is a marbled purple stripe variety, and it has a warm, mellow flavor, known to be especially great raw or roasted. And at the end, I'm actually going to show you a quick little recipe for roasting that I'm just absolutely obsessed with. And as we go, I just noticed that we've more than doubled participants since I started off. If you've missed anything, just reminding you that I will be sending out the recording afterwards, as well as a 4-page growing garlic guide to everyone that has registered this evening. And you can use the Q&A to ask any questions as we go so that you don't forget them. I will cover, of course, questions at the very end. Okay, again, with the best practices here, we're talking about autumn sowing. So sometimes people can get into disagreements about whether you can sow garlic in the spring, or in particular during the fall spring of like January when everything thaws. And by all means, experiment. I'm not here to tell you that things are impossible, but best practices are the garlic that you just saw, that garlic. We planted that November 1st last year. Now, maybe it will be a little earlier this year, maybe it'll be a little later. So we're actually watching the long-term forecast, the kind of 14-day forecast to help us choose a date. Traditionally, over the past number of years, we've planted kind of in between Thanksgiving and Halloween. Last year was the latest we did. But what you're looking for, what your goal is for your garlic to have enough time to put roots into the ground, but not enough time to sprout before kind of a hard frost gets it. So get established a little bit, but not actually growing above ground. So generally, we're talking about 4 to 6 weeks before we're looking at kind of a hard frost where the ground is freezing, like 4 to 6 weeks before that. And you will be mulching as well. So you're kind of hoping that once it freezes, it will stay frozen, and you do that through mulching. And the reason why we do autumn sowing rather than spring for hardneck garlic, which is what we grow in Newfoundland, is that it requires vernalization, which is a long period of exposure to freezing temperatures to develop fully. So spring planting may result in actually, if it grows at all, it may result in smaller garlic, known as pearls. And that's because they're just one clove, so they don't actually split into multiple cloves. They're just a single clove, or it may not even work at all. You might not even get a pearl out of it. Okay, moving on to location. We are covering a lot tonight, so apologies if I kind of skim over some things, but again, you're going to get that 4-page guide besides, and feel free to ask questions if I do skim something that is unclear. But garlic doesn't like wet feet, is what we call it. So it doesn't like the ground to be constantly wet. It needs good drainage. That said, it does drink significantly, so there's a balance to be had a little bit there. You can increase the drainage of your soil by really tilling down into it, and we'll get into that in soil prep on the next slide as well. But just a word on raised beds, considering we're doing this webinar for the CBS Community Garden, and many people have raised beds, is they often have almost too good of drainage, just by design. So come May and June, if it gets dry, if we haven't had a lot of snow, then you may need to be periodically watering your garlic in those months if it's in a raised bed. But on the other side of it too, people have a tendency not to fluff up their raised bed enough. So year after year, your soil is getting compact. and just hardened. So you might actually have a drainage problem. So you need to fluff that up and amend it accordingly by adding organic materials to it. And then the next 2 points are we're going to cover that in mulching besides, but just to say that you're not, if you're planting in a raised bed, you're not planting in the ground, which is where it has the most protection from a freeze thaw or a fake spring. So you may need additional mulching when you're using a raised bed. All right. Soil prep, like I said, amending your soil here. So garlic kind of needs moderate levels of NPK. If it's possible, it's a little late now to be thinking about this, but for future years, you might consider growing a green manure crop or a green cover crop, they're sometimes called, in the later summer in your future garlic location, and then tilling that into the soil 2 to 4 weeks prior to planting your garlic. A different way of doing this, though, is also just layering in seaweed or leaves 6 to 8 inches underground where you're going to be planting. So kind of remove half a foot of soil from your location, or if you're doing drills like me, you can kind of like move it to the side, add in your layer of leaves or seaweed, and then build your drill again on top of that. And that's just adding organic material, which helps with, of course, nutrients, but also with drainage. So that will help amend your soil somewhat. It does take a little while to actually get any of these amendments to be working or fully incorporated into your soil. So if you did happen to do a soil test, you can do some of these at home, or you can bring it for soil analysis available through the Provincial Department of Fisheries, Forestry, and Agriculture. And you do find out that perhaps your soil is poor. You also may want to be thinking about making a compost tea to be putting on in the spring. So once your garlic sprouts about 3 inches tall or so, then start watering it with a compost tea every couple weeks, maybe every 3 weeks. And you can also side dress with a low nitrogen fertilizer. A compost tea is quite simple. You can just look that up on YouTube, but just ever so quickly, you put compost in, say, an onion bag and soak it in a tub of water for anywhere from 2 days to a week, and then water your garden with that. If it smells too rank, then it probably is too rank. Compost tea can go bad, but as long as you're using it kind of frequently and using it up frequently, then you should be just fine to make your own compost tea with compost or even seaweed too. Add some kelp in there. And just a quick note to say that brown tipped leaves are completely normal on garlic. So I see this all the time in early summer, people wondering what is happening with their garlic. Couple inches of brown on the ends of your leaves is entirely normal. Don't worry about it. And if you do worry, again, compost tea does wonders. All right. Gonna have a drink of tea here. I'm talking my throat dry. Again, if you've got questions, the Q&A, I'm going to tackle it at the end, but it's there for you so that you don't forget your questions as we go. All right, clove prep. So day of planting, and again, we're in autumn. We've picked our location, we've prepped our soil. A couple weeks beforehand, we put that seaweed or leaves half a foot under underground where we are planting, fluffed it up so there's lots of drainage, especially if you're using a raised bed like that and you haven't fluffed it up in a number of years. You really got down and fluffed maybe even 2 feet of that soil. Day of planting comes, this is when you're separating your cloves. So right up to day of planting, leave it in that bulb. That's where it's most protected. It's going to stay, assuming that you keep it somewhere cool and dry. Keeping it in the bulb will make sure that it doesn't get any mold or anything growing on it in advance of planting, and make sure that it doesn't dry out either. So like I said, you want to be able to eat this garlic. When you're planting it, it should just be like hard to resist eating. If it's not, then that's not what you want to be planting. You do, however, you do not skin or clean your garlic. So hard to resist eating, but also probably still dirty. So try to leave on as much skin or paper as possible when you're separating out those cloves. Just do your best. I know sometimes when I'm doing it, some of them just don't have paper in between them, or the paper goes in one direction and leaving another one exposed. That's okay. Just do your best there to leave on as much as you can. And also removing the root base from the bottom of it. Sometimes that sticks onto individual cloves as well. If you do notice any damage, cuts, bruising, if the cloves aren't hard, if you don't want to eat it, then maybe skip those cloves. And you can also skip double cloves. Now, double cloves can definitely grow. It's just that they'll grow 2 bulbs instead of 1. And what I mean by double cloves is when there's no skin in between and they're impossible to separate without damaging them. So if you plant it that like double clove or conjoined clove, you're actually going to get 2 bulbs that are competing for that space. And we are planting them 6 inches apart. So obviously if we're planting them in the same hole, that's not enough space for the garlic. They'll still grow. If you're limited on the number of seeds or cloves that you have, then you can make that decision. But you can also just enjoy eating those instead. Sowing. So, like I said, we're planting 6 inches apart. Drills can be double sown though. I do these in drills. I know a lot of you are doing them in raised beds though. So just think about having them about 6 inches apart, especially when we're talking about the ones I have are what we call colossal. So they're at least 3 inches in diameter. So if this one's 3 inches and that one's 3 inches, like they need a little bit of space. So 6 inches apart, but drills can be double sown, and that just means they're still 6 inches apart. It's just going down the drill. There's 2 rows in the same drill. And they can even be zigzagged back and forth if necessary. And I mentioned this before, but circling back, if you're planting in a raised bed, keep your garlic kind of towards the center. So if you are planting in the ground, of course, that is the better protection from a freeze thaw. But in a raised bed, you can imagine that the sides of the raised bed are going to thaw before the center will. So try to keep it in perhaps about a foot from any side of the raised bed, just for that extra insurance against a fake spring or a freeze thaw. Especially as our climate just becomes more erratic. So you get I'll cover mulching next as well, but sometimes you hear people saying, oh, I've never mulched my garlic and it's always been fine. Yeah, okay, I can't deny your experience, but I would, for the sake of putting on a bit of mulch, I would rather the insurance. So that's the same thing here. I'd rather the insurance of putting it further away from the sides of a raised bed than leaving it exposed to a potentially warm winter, because it does need to freeze and stay frozen. As for height, putting it down into the ground, you're looking at double the height of the clove. So if your clove is 1.5 inches tall, this is only approximate. You really don't have to like take out the measuring tape or anything. But if your clove's 1.5 inches tall, your hole is about 3 inches deep. And especially with these large kind of colossal sized ones, they can be rather thick, of course, or large, each individual clove, I mean. So make sure that they're hitting the bottom. So when you make a hole, there isn't an air pocket underneath your clove, because that can cause issues as well. So of course, don't like force it down there and cause any damage, but and that said, also try to clear out any large pebbles out of your holes as you go, but make sure that there's no air pockets, particularly I find underneath these large cloves. You might find that happens, so try to fill those in. Mulching. All right, so we've got them in the ground now. And the next step is mulching. So you can mulch right away if you're prepared to mulch day of planting. Perfect. But it's just as acceptable to mulch even immediately after a hard frost, because of course we're trying to freeze the ground and keep it frozen. So don't feel like you need to do this all in one day. Definitely like separate your cloves the same day as planting, but mulching, if you want to do that the following weekend or 2 weekends later, that sort of thing, totally fine. And what we mean by mulching is we're actually covering it evenly with about 2 inches of leaves, sometimes kelp, sometimes straw. Straw, hay is not recommended because it will more likely mold, but straw is fine. It doesn't retain as much moisture. We generally use leaves at the farm. And then we also put boughs on top of the leaves so that they don't blow away. So that's just us. That you could also use netting. You see that a lot too, to keep your leaves in place. And again, the mulch just insulates the garlic from the freeze-thaw swings that we have during warm winters. And we do recommend it across the board. Again, there will be people that will tell you otherwise. But I just would rather the insurance. And you know that our winters have been just very erratic. And while last winter was, no, it was 2020. That was an amazing winter with lots of snow. 2021 was fairly warm, so that mulch protects against that and just helps your garlic thrive. In windswept areas and raised beds, thicker mulching may be necessary. So I'm saying 2 inches of like fluffy leaves, not like once it rains, your leaves are going to compact and everything besides, but kind of 2 inches of fluffed up leaves is good. But in windswept areas that the snow is going to be windswept, because snow is a natural mulch, then you may need actually thicker mulching. And boughs help with that too, because of course the boughs keep the snow in place too. If snow gets trapped under the boughs, perfect. And raised beds just because of, I mean, they're above ground, so again, they're just more exposed, more sides of that to thaw, and more likely to be windswept as well because they're higher up. You're going to remove your mulch, well, not entirely, but your boughs at least, minimum, when they're no longer frozen to the ground or the leaves, usually in kind of probably late April, I'll say. there's no really, I mean, there is a too early time. Don't remove them in February or anything, but your garlic's pretty hardy at that point. So if it's an early spring and not just a fall spring, but a truly early spring, you can probably remove those boughs in early April. And if you do have especially a thicker mulch, you may need to fluff it up at that time as well, or when it starts to thaw, because the garlic, if it can't push up through, it'll start growing sideways and be kind of white and sickly in trying to find the light. So if you know where you've planted, and this is a good argument for planting in rows rather than here and there, and well, that's good pest control or pest deterrent. If you don't know where it is, it's hard to kind of remove some of the mulch just around where it's poking up, just so that it can find the sun. We had to do that this year past, and it was just fine. Of course, we had an amazing season on garlic. Yeah, they're my pride and joy, actually. Okay, new little side agenda here. We've moved on from growing garlic to enjoying it. So we are reaching the end. Those kind of the last 3 topics, I think. So again, if I've skimmed over anything that you need more information on, put your questions into the Q&A, and also you will get that growing garlic guide in your emails besides, but the Q&A is there for you. So garlic has, if not 2 harvests, 3 in a sort of way. So scapes, I think that's my next picture, is the tubular flower stalk that shoots up between the leaves. There's just 1 scape per plant. And once it comes up straight and then starts to turn in a U and then does a 360 and starts to turn back. Once it's done kind of the 360, you just want to snap it off right at the leaf so that it doesn't go hard. If it, at some point, it will start to go straight again, whip straight. And at that point, you'll get a bulbul instead of a scape out of it. So you can sort of leave it at that point. I'm not recommending that. But if you did like happen to miss harvesting a scape and it turns into a bulbul, then you can still eat those, or you can plant them. Look that up separately, because again, it's not kind of the basic way of growing garlic, but it's worth some experimentation. The ideal is to harvest the scape though, because if you leave it to go to bulbul, it is taking more energy from your bulb, and you are therefore going to get a smaller bulb out of it. So you're snapping off the scape so that the energy is redirected. Instead of making a flower, it's going to push more energy into the bulb instead. And then 3 to 4 weeks after, and or when, you know, over half of your leaves have turned brown, it's time to start pulling your garlic. You do want to loosen your ground before pulling. I'll have a picture similar to that in a moment, but if you pull your stalk, some of them will come up very easy and perfect, but others, your stalk might actually separate from the bulb entirely, which is not what you want for neither storing it or curing it and replanting. So at that point, you can only eat that bulb more or less immediately. So for storage or for planting, make sure that you're kind of loosening the ground before pulling it up, just so that you don't actually damage the where the stalk connects to the bulb. Green garlic, like I said, fresh out of the ground, leaves still on it, stalk still green, is considered a delicacy, and you can actually even eat the stalk. So when the stalk is still quite green, you can slice it up thinly and fry that in butter. That's why I say kind of like 3 harvests. You've got your scape and or bulb. You only get one of those two. And then your actual bulb, but also if you're game for it, you can try eating the stalk only when it's fresh though. Oh, and I just have a note to say oh, there it is. So on your right-hand side here is a funny little artistic photo of a lot of scapes. So again, there's one per plant, but you can see how they have little flower bulbs at the end of it. So that actually turns into a bulb on your left-hand side, you can see. So each of these what looks like tiny garlic cloves are pretty much tiny garlic cloves. You can eat these as if they are. And that is kind of your flower of your garlic. When you're eating your scape, you eat everything below that what will be a bulb. And you can actually just for eating your scape, the bulb is just basically a tiny clove, but your scape you can substitute for your standard garlic in like stir fries. I recommend grilling on a barbecue or sauteing like you would asparagus. It takes a little longer than asparagus to saute, but just until it's kind of charred and softened. That's how I enjoy it most. Okay. Curing. So this is a picture of what you do not want to cure. So if you're pulling up garlic and you have something like this, where your paper has been separated, this should just be more or less on your menu this week. And I do have some recipes there for freezing or preserving it otherwise instead of curing, because this garlic will not cure properly. Diseases, mold, etc. will be able to get in there, and it just will be a waste of garlic. So you might as well roast it and enjoy it now as green garlic instead of wasting it trying to cure it. So sorry, I should go back to say curing is another way of saying drying. It's just the language we use for garlic. You first of all select your garlic. So that's more or less what I just was talking about. You again don't want anything that doesn't look right. If it has any cuts in it like this, if you've pulled the stalk out of it, those are not garlic that you're going to cure. Once you've selected them, you hang them to dry. I don't know if I have, okay, yes, I do have another slide on this. Okay, great. Yeah, I guess that is all for this slide. It looks like everything else is on this side. So to cure it, you hang it to dry, usually upside down, somewhere that is cool, dry, and has airflow. Moisture, heat, or excessive cold may actually provoke sprouting, while poor air circulation results in mold setting in. Alternatively to hanging, if you don't have somewhere to necessarily hang it, you can lay it flat on a single layer, like on a screen, and you want to be rotating that more or less daily. You do leave on the stalks, the roots, and the leaves for garlic to cure, so you're not cutting them off like you would at the end, like you're used to seeing garlic cut off near to the bulb. Leave everything on. You can like roughly brush off cakes of mud or dirt, but there's no need to actually clean it. And if your bulbs have grown tightly together, like we talked about those conjoined cloves, if you ended up doing that, either on purpose or by accident, it happens, then those two bulbs do need to be separated in order to cure them, because there's just moisture trapped in between them and they will not cure properly if they're left like that. Once they are cured, it takes about like about 4 weeks, there'll be nothing green left to it. It becomes more or less a dead wood, and at that point you can cut off an inch or so above the bulb, and you'll often find that it looks hollow. So if you're not sure whether it's cured entirely, you can start cutting off furthest from the bulb and start looking into it, looking at the stalk closely to see if you can see any green. If you see green, put it back to dry some more, and leave on as much as possible. But as you kind of see often, you'll see it looking hollow like this here picture. And that's when it's curing properly. Sometimes it will be solid and not hollow. That's okay too, as long as you're not seeing any green or any brown. If you're starting to see it the stalk go mushy, then it's again time to enjoy that garlic now rather than waste your time losing it by trying to cure it. So keep those things in mind. And again, cool and dry. So by cool, under 14 degrees for sure, away from sunlight and excessive heat. So this is after it's cured. I mean, it's basically the same thing while you're curing as well, but after it's cured, you don't need to worry about airflow necessarily. But you do still want it somewhere that is roughly 14 degrees, away from sunlight, away from excessive heat, away from excessive moisture too. And once it is cured, you can at that point brush off any remaining dirt gently, such as like with a toothbrush or something, but still leave as much skin intact as possible until you're just ready to consume it. And this is just a picture of garlic laying flat on a screen. This is partially cured, so don't be mistaken by what might look like brown stalks. Once you actually cut some of it or just look closely, squeeze a little bit, you'll see that these stalks are just, only the leaves are kind of brown, but the stalks are still green. And then this is our massive garlic shed. We had 2,000 garlic grow this year, and they all did amazingly well. So this is our garlic drying. And that's my dad. Enjoying garlic. So I've become obsessed with roasting. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. I've always been a big fan of eating garlic, but so roasting is the way to go, especially if you have a bulk amount of garlic to get through. You simply cut off the tops of it in bulk. You can just put it in a Pyrex dish, but you can in this recipe, I talk about wrapping it in aluminum foil. But even in your Pyrex, you cover it with aluminum foil after drizzling with olive oil, and then you roast it for like 45 minutes on 375, and it just like scoops out. You take a spoon and you just like, there's no peeling the garlic anymore. That's the worst part of garlic, right? Like peeling all those little cloves. Although thankfully our cloves are ginormous and that's wonderful too, but it's the way to go regardless, because a spoon slides in and you now have a spoonful of garlic, and I like to call it 1 ingredient garlic butter at that point because it is delicious. Yeah, so just a quick little recipe, and this is in the Growing Garlic Guide as well. That 4-pager that you will receive by email. And with that, we are going to move on to questions. So again, the Q&A is there. I know some have accumulated, but just quickly, again, these are the contact information for the CBS Community Garden between their Facebook group and their email, as well as myself at the Foxtrap Access Road Market if you do need to get garlic, or you're interested in knowing more about hampers for fundraisers, then you can get in contact with us as well. Or just stop by the stand on the roadside. All right, questions. Get my breath here for a moment. That was a lot of information, and we're 50 minutes in, so that's pretty great. Try to keep this around the hour mark, but of course I'm here for you anyway. All right. Okay, the first one is, what is NPK? Sorry, I skimmed that. So that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So in the Growing Garlic guide, I do have what a standard fertilizer mix might look like. You can look these up besides, but when you do a soil test, you can often get like cheaper ones from like department stores and such. They're not perfect by any means, but they will give you a rough idea of whether your soil needs any one of these three and what your pH is. And your pH should be fairly neutral for garlic. And then for your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, you can adjust using a standard fertilizer even across the board. Or if you know which one of those you need more of, you can adjust accordingly. So the one that I have in the guide has like, you can use blood meal for nitrogen, bone meal for phosphorus, wood ash for potassium, and limestone for pH. So if you happen to know that, you need lots of nitrogen, but your potassium's just fine, then you can adjust that standard fertilizer mix that I've got listed in the Growing Garlic guide. Next question. Can you grow garlic in pots and containers? I'm not going to say no. I'm always like, welcome to anyone who wants to experiment. Feel like I probably have heard of people doing it and bringing it into their shed, perhaps? Although that doesn't make sense now that I say it. Scratch that. If you did it in a pot or container, I would try to insulate it with as much snow as possible, because that would be my concern. Like in a pot, your pot is entirely above ground, and I'm imagining a pot is just kind of like maybe 1 foot wide type thing. That whole thing is going to freeze and thaw a lot. So you would need to insulate it from that. You want it to freeze and stay frozen. So I'm not going to say no, but it's definitely not best practice. What is a drill? When you see rows, like bigger gardens generally, not so much a raised bed, but if you have a garden in your backyard, you'll and like in the ground, most people plant in like mounds up and down. A drill goes down and then up again, usually about I think it's 27 inches between drills generally. It's what we plant in any kind of more major farm. You'll see drills more so. You don't need drills. It's just, it helps with tractors more so, I guess. Can I use commercial mulch for mulching? I wouldn't use any that has dye in it. You will dye your garlic and maybe not want to consume that. That won't look or probably taste delicious. But I mean, if your commercial mulch is organic, then yes, like completely organic, then yes. That said, most mulches are often wood, and wood, while generally, wood takes nitrogen from your soil initially. If you're using a very composted mulch, a wood mulch, I mean, one that the wood is like basically sawdust and not fresh sawdust. I mean, like this wood has rotted into sawdust, then that would be fine. But I would more or less stay away from that. You can really pick up bags of leaves everywhere. I don't know where you're listening in from, but here in kind of CBS, St. John's, people have bags of leaves out on the side of the road that we just like go and take and no one minds. How old do the leaves need to be for mulching? Previously rotted or just fallen off the trees? We just use them fresh, and we use fairly fresh kelp too. It's better if particularly the kelp is kind of more rotted or at least cut up a little bit if you are using kelp, because it can be large pieces that take a while to compost. But for leaves, we really don't worry about that. Fresh leaves are just perfect, either or. And just someone else again asking about wood chips. I guess I can expand upon that to say that if you were removing the wood chips too, if that was your only choice for any reason, I just worry that wood chips do take longer to break down into compost. And while they're breaking down, they take a lot of nitrogen. Once they're broken down, they put a lot of nitrogen back into your soil, but in that initial process, they take nitrogen away. So just general rules for anything, not just garlic, but wood chips aren't the best unless they're fairly composted already. Doesn't matter where you plant, direction of sun, etc. So the biggest thing about planting is, or the location of planting in my mind, is, well, A, your drainage, I guess, we covered that, but then B, your, I've lost my train of thought. Location. I just completely lost my train of thought there. Oh, raised beds versus in the ground. So, good drainage, which you can amend using adding organic matter to your soil, and then just knowing whether you're doing it in the ground versus in a raised bed, whether it needs that extra mulch. And even if it's in the ground, it can still be a windswept area. So adding the boughs to trap the snow to provide that additional insulation against a freeze thaw. Then those are the big things. After that, direction of sun. We've done well with it mostly in fairly sunny areas. I think you would do well in part sun as well. It certainly isn't a shade plant though. And this person is asking the difference between hay and straw. I haven't had a personal experience with this, but it's just what I have been told or found in my research, is that for mulching, the difference between hay and straw is that hay retains more moisture. So once it gets wet, it stays wet, and might rot and provide like breeding grounds for mold on top of your garlic, which you wouldn't like to have, versus straw doesn't retain moisture and doesn't mold. It's again one of those things that you'll find a lot of people will say, oh, I've always used hay and it's never been a problem. But perhaps that's survivorship bias. They've just haven't had that 1 year that it mattered yet. But it's just kind of an insurance policy to choose straw over hay when you can. Do you add fertilizer when you plant? Is the next question. Only in terms of adding organic matter. So I talked about putting leaves or kelp under, like a foot under where you're planting, to kind of actually dig it down into the ground. You could also, I think in the garlic guide, I talk about, oh yeah, the standard fertilizer. You can mix your standard fertilizer in, which is your blood meal, bone meal, etc., into the kind of top 6 inches of soil to help with any nutrient issues you might have, or whether even if you haven't done a soil test, you can do that. And then there's also the green manure or the cover crop. If you were lucky enough to have planted a cover crop some weeks ago now, 2 to 4 weeks before, you can till that into where you are planting your garlic. But in terms of adding a specific fertilizer or adding, like doing a compost tea, I wouldn't worry about that right now. I would more so worry about adding the organic matter and the standard fertilizer mix of real items like blood meal, bone meal, green sand, limestone, rather than a compost tea when planting. Next question, what variety do you sell? This person has grown music variety last year, which did well. That's good to see. We have done music in the past. We currently grow marbled purple stripe varieties. So I did two different marbled purple stripes. We're selling only one of them. The other you can look forward to next year, because it is, if anyone has seen my garlic, everyone comments how huge it is. The other variety is bigger. So we're pretty excited to just like see how big we can do garlic. It's yeah, a little fun thing we're doing. But that, I guess that's kind of more or less why I've gone that route. Is my ability to get larger garlic by doing the marbled purple stripes. This year we're selling purple Russian. God, I blanked out for a moment there. Purple Russian garlic, and it is kind of a great grower. You should have seen I couldn't find the picture of it, but I had garlic. It looked like a cornfield, like it was like literally up to here. I don't know if I can't even see myself on video there now, but it was like nearly up to my shoulders. If you had to take in the top leaf, I'm sure if I had have left the scapes to grow, they would have been taller than I am, and I'm nearly 6 foot. So marbled purple stripe, specifically purple Russian, is our variety on sale. This question is about companion garlic gardening, and what is best matched to what plants. I don't think I have that in front of me other than to say that garlic does well as a pest deterrent for many plants, including slugs. So, but unfortunately, I just don't have that in front of me. I might even add that into the growing garlic guide, just to circle back for you because I don't have it off the top of my head. Someone asking if adding sand to their beds will help with compaction and drainage. Organic matter is really the go-to. Sand can definitely help. It really depends on your soil, but we have found certainly our best ground is after we take garlic out of it, because we've added so much organic matter in terms of the mulch, the leaves that we've had on top of it, that the soil is just amazing afterwards. So if your beds are really compact, then yes, sand is a quick fix. But also you really do want to be working in some organic matter such as leaves and kelp and compost. Not straight up compost. Compost generally you want as a already composted. We are 7 minutes over there now, but I think there's just a few more questions. So I'll see what I can do. Clover as a cover crop. Yeah, absolutely. Clover is a great cover crop. There's a number of options. The co-op on Topsail Road has cover crops for you. This person is wondering the price of our garlic at the farm. It does go by weight, so it can range. The most colossal of them, meaning 3 inches or more, are around $6 a bulb, and it goes down from there according to size. And this person asking when our garlic is available to buy and will it be at the CBS Highway location? Yes, it is there. It is available now. We are there Wednesday through Sunday every week. And yeah, it's there waiting for you. As well as the St. John's Farmers Market location on Saturdays. If you do want bulk amounts, meaning at least 20 bulbs, then send us an email and we'll sort that out for you. Some people, this question saying, I see some people hanging to dry from the stalks. I noticed you hang from the bulb. Is this the right or wrong way? My experience is that you don't want to actually bend or damage your stalk in any way for it to dry properly. So you can imagine if you're tightly wrapping from the stalk, you might actually bend it, and that might cause issues. Also, if you're not tying it tightly and you're tying it bulb down, stalk up, then it might just fall out, hit the ground, get bruised. Also not ideal. So by hanging it upside down, I don't have to tie it tightly for it to stay in place. So that is, in my opinion, best practice. This person, final question, unless anyone else wants to chime in there now, asking if we ship we can ship on the island. There's regulations that Newfoundland cannot ship anything that might have soil attached to it off of the island, but we can ship within the island. Of course, you would have to pay for shipping costs and the such. Certainly reach out to us by email. The email should still be up on your screen. And yeah, no, we can definitely ship it, providing that you are on the island of Newfoundland. Sorry, Labrador, can't send it off of the island. All right. And I do see a few chat messages, but I think everyone was great on putting their questions in the Q&A. So thank you all so very much for attending. I will get that growing garlic guide out to you by email, as well as sending this out, the recording of this out to you in case you did want to rewatch it or share it with family and friends. Hopefully I will see you soon at one of our 2 locations. If you do happen to swing by the CBS location, you're more likely to meet my sister, Wanda Lee, but she's just as happy to serve you as I. If you're at the St. John's Farmers Market, that is always me. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much. And happy growing. And don't forget to check out the CBS Community Garden events, especially that pumpkin stroll, because that is like something to experience.